Our next speaker, Anthea Hancocks, who's CEO at Scanlon, and the Scanlon Foundation and the Scanlon Foundation Research Institute is an organisation I'm sure some of you have had some exposure to directly by knowing Anthea, but perhaps more likely through their annual Social Cohesion Report, which is a terrific snapshot of what's going on across the country around that very important measure of how strong our community bonds are and how socially cohesive we are. Anthea, if I can invite you to address us, that would be great, and thank you for your time.
Hello, everyone. I understand that you haven't had too many PowerPoint presentations, and now you're going to get another PowerPoint presentation and another whole lot of numbers. So my apologies if it's all going to start swimming around in your heads. I would also like to say that I'm very grateful for having been invited here today to speak. And as you say, I've been on the periphery of some aspects to do with multicultural media, but I'm not an expert in that space at all. You all are. So I thought I would focus in on a little bit about what's looking at the social cohesion and what multicultural media can do to contribute to social cohesion. First, just as a general overview, the Scanlon Foundation is a private philanthropic foundation. It was commenced in 2002, and it focuses specifically on social cohesion and in particular the transition of migrants into Australian society. It created the Scanlon Foundation Research Institute in 2019, but it has been undertaking research since 2007. And it is home to the Mapping Social Cohesion Report, the Australian Cohesion Index. We've done work on refugee integration, and we're just concluding a project on strengthening democracy. So social cohesion to us is the willingness of members of society to cooperate together with each other in order to survive and prosper. So if you need a sense of where we're coming from, that's what we look at. And then we look at 5 different domains. One of those is belonging, this sense of pride and belonging that you might have in Australia and the Australian way of life and neighbourhood. We look at worth, people's sense of happiness and financial satisfaction. We look at social inclusion and justice, so that sense of fairness in society, and trust in government and institutions. We look at participation, engagement in political activities, social, community, civic activities. And then we also look at acceptance and rejection, which is really support for minorities and experience of discrimination. Probably because I suspect there's a question floating around in people's minds. In the 2023 survey, we surveyed around 7,500 people. Out of that, probably about 2,500, maybe 3,000 come from non-English speaking backgrounds. We also do boosts into particular communities in language so that we've got enough knowledge and basis on which to make the sorts of claims and data that we're going to share with you now. So what is the role of multicultural media in building, strengthening and building and strengthening social cohesion? But first of all, let me tell you a little bit about what the current state of social cohesion is in Australia. Here you can see our index of social cohesion. So you can see that it started at 100. In actual fact, 100 is a relatively arbitrary number. That's the number we chose to start at. But since that point in time, you can see that it's generally started to decline. What we don't know, and we'll have to keep doing this for quite some time, is whether or not it's declining to a point at which it will be stable, or whether or not it is actually declining, and we need to really worry about that. The index is a combination of all of those 5 different areas that have come together, that we pulled together in order to give you some overview of where social cohesion is in Australia. Interestingly enough, and because there's a number of things that Cos mentioned that do have an overlap into what we've done, here you can see that the most cohesive generation happens to be the older generation. They've really settled into life and become more accustomed to the way things work, whereas younger people tend to be least cohesive, and they tend to be the ones that are pushing up against the sorts of things that they would like to see changed. But in 2023, you can see that there was a weaker sense of pride and belonging in Australia. And I do emphasise that as weaker sense of pride and belonging in Australia as a whole, because there are other things that are positive elements to do with local areas. There's an increase of financial stress. I'm not telling anybody anything they don't already know, and declining financial satisfaction. An increased concern for economic inequality, so people are far more aware of the fact that there is economic inequality. Weaker trust in government and in people, and increased pessimism for the future, and greater division on key challenges and issues. The financial hardship side of things, you can see here that there's a fair percentage of people and an increased percentage of people who are dissatisfied with their financial situation. Not terribly sure what that was. 40% of people, and we don't ask them to choose this. This is them self-describing. People self-describe as being poor, struggling to pay bills, or just getting along. And you can see that's an increased number from previous year. 12% sometimes went or often went without meals in the last 12 months. 12% sometimes or often have trouble paying rent or mortgage. And 22% sometimes or often could not pay for medicines or health. Also, as Cos just mentioned, renters and mortgagees, those in their 20s, 30s and 40s, are experiencing hardship. And that number is increasing. Single parents, group households and people living alone are also more likely to report financial hardship. And the same groups also feel unhappy or isolated from others. So all of these numbers and these statistics are, of course, of concern, but I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know. Those people, though, that are experiencing severe hardship, financial hardship, other things flow from that. They're less likely to have a great sense of belonging. They're less likely to trust government. They're less likely to believe that people can be trusted. They're more likely to feel isolated from others. They're more likely to believe that life in Australia is going to get worse. And they are less likely to agree that migrant diversity makes Australia stronger. But we absolutely remain connected and engaged with our local communities. More than 8 in 10 people say that they have neighbours that help and that they get along with, and 55% are actively engaged. We continue to value multiculturalism. The relationship to First Nations is important, and they recognise the contributions of immigrants to Australia. Nearly 9 in 10 people agree that multiculturalism has been good for Australia. We're committed to democracy and engaged in our political system, with 9 in 10 people thinking democracy is a very or fairly good system of government, not without needing to be tweaked, but in actual fact, generally, it's pretty good. These are really important things to remember. But this concern about economic inequality is really important. 63% of people agree that Australia is a land of economic opportunity in the long run, and this is down from 74%. 84% agree that the gap between those with high incomes and those with low incomes is too large, which is also increased. So 84% of people are aware of that inequality. And 38% of people agree that people living on low incomes in Australia receive enough financial support. So clearly that's down. So less people believe that they're getting enough support. There is distrust in the political system. 41% of people think that the system of government in Australia needs minor change. 84% think government leaders abuse their power. And 36% of people think that Australians' elections are fair, which I think is a really quite startling figure. Trust can be selective, but we are aware. 18% of people reported experiencing discrimination in the previous 12 months based on their skin colour, their ethnic origin or their religion, which is up from 16%. 58% of people hold negative attitudes towards migrants, and in particular Indian, China, Ethiopia, Lebanon, Iraq and Sudan, which is down from 66%, which is a good thing that it's coming down, but it's still a concerning number. I should say that most people have what's called a hierarchy of discrimination. So some are at the top and others are further down. The English is still in there. There's still some people that don't care for the English either. But it is interesting, though, that 27% of people hold a negative attitude towards Muslims, Now, this is down from 40% in 2019. So there are things to be really grateful about, that these sort of changing attitudes are seeing their way through to the way that people report. And 62% of people believe that racism is a fairly or very big problem in Australia. So that level of awareness amongst the general population is also something that we need to build on. So there is ongoing support for multiculturalism. That ongoing support is increasing. So 89% of people, as I mentioned, agree that multiculturalism has been good for Australia. 89% of people disagree that it should be possible to reject immigrants based on their ethnic origin or religion or race. 78% of people disagree that immigrants take jobs away. And 94% of people agree that someone who was born outside Australia makes just as good a citizen as somebody who was born here. And these are really important and powerful statistics. So what can we build on? Well, if you look at the graph that says my local area is a place where people from different national or ethnic backgrounds get on well together, you can see here that it's stayed fairly high for quite some time. Australia is a highly cohesive society, and it's actually an incredibly positive society. But sometimes we tend to focus on the small negative components rather than actually focusing on the strengths within Australian society. So what I also wanted to mention is that 81% of people have 2 or more close friends from different national, ethnic or religious backgrounds, and 40% have 5 or more close friends. That's really, really important from a social cohesion perspective. And 38% of people agree that ethnic minorities should be given Australian government assistance to maintain their customs and traditions. Now that, though, is almost a counter, because they're very happy for the diversity that we've got within Australia, but exactly where you allocate your money, that's something that people have an opinion about. And here, community and civic participation, you can see the percentages of people over the last 3 years who participate in community support groups, social or religious groups, civic or political groups, and unpaid help outside the household. So what will social cohesion look like in 5 years? Well, it really does depend. It depends on, can we build trust in governments, in institutions, in people and in neighbourhoods? How do we deal with economic inequality? Perceptions versus reality. Sometimes people have a very inbuilt perception that their circumstances are not necessarily going to get better, and you could see that in the statistics. But that isn't necessarily always true. And reducing the gap, though, will be an important component of what we do. What are the leadership narratives? Truth versus lies versus personal interpretation. It's going to be a real challenge for anybody who's operating within the media. Can we build resilience? Critical analysis, civics education, democratic participation, all of those are incredibly important to build resilience. And does the media embrace the power of positivity? Are you partisan? How do you deal with mis or disinformation? And international influence as well. That's my next point, and I do hope that I'm not being too presumptive in what I'm going to say next. So what's the role of multicultural media in building and strengthening social cohesion? Well, it's about fostering, facilitating and demonstrating. So I'm going to ask some questions. Do you have a vision of what Australia is going to look like in 20 years' time? Each of you, everybody within your organisation, do you have a vision about what sort of Australia you want to have in 20 years' time? What does it look like? How do we talk about it? What are the features that you see? Those sorts of things are incredibly important to know in your mind where you want things to go. What mechanisms do you use within the channels and the opportunities that you've got to test for commonality or divergent ideas and values within your community? How aware are you of those differences? And I'm quite sure that many of you are inherently, but how well are you actually tracking that sort of information? Does the balance of content that you have presented allow the imagining of communities? How much are we fostering the ability of those people that are participating in your areas of the media to be able to think about what type of future they want? What type of role do they want to play in creating that type of a future? How do you ensure that there is positive role modelling by your presenters? What role do you have in talking to the people that are presenting on your platforms to ensure that they are actually making a positive contribution towards social cohesion and not spending all their time venting and complaining and discussing about particular issues going on? I'm not suggesting it's not important to vent, but there needs to be a balance. How is your content bringing people together? Cross-cultural groups, within cultural groups? How are different age groups exposed to common issues that are in other communities and cultures? And how passionate are you about contributing to Australia's social cohesion? So on that final note, I just want to say that we need you. Everybody needs you to contribute to social cohesion. We need you to build bridges. We need you to build familiarity between groups. We need you to foster optimism. We need you to have a vision for the future. We need you to ensure that the people that are listening to you have a voice, and we need to make sure that those people who have a voice know that they're being heard. So, thank you.